Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
Today we're looking at the uneasy truce that followed the longest federal government shutdown in U.S. history. That was a 43-day saga that finally ended in mid-November 2025.
It brought immediate relief, for sure.
It did, but that feeling didn't last very long because the stopgap funding measure that got everyone back to work, well, it created a brand new, very dangerous clock.
A very dangerous clock.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is how quickly that whole narrative shifted from, relief to just pure anxiety.
Right.
The government reopened thanks to this mixture of temporary funding mechanisms, a continuing resolution, or CR, and what they called a minibus appropriations package.
But that funding is precarious.
Absolutely. It all expires on January 30, 2026, so this isn't stability. It's managed uncertainty at best.
Exactly. So our mission today is to synthesize the consequences of those 43 days and really clarify why this January cliff is going to be so much more complicated than the last one.
And we should, because we have a mountain of sources detailing the impacts on local services, on the private sector, and the specific political fights that make a long-term deal seem, well, almost impossible right now.
And it feels like we need to analyze this through the lens of, institutional breakdown.
I think so. I mean, we talk about congressional dysfunction all the time, but the fact is, Congress hasn't managed to pass all 12 of the necessary appropriations bills on time in nearly 3 decades.
3 decades.
So this January 30th deadline isn't just a political football. It's the latest symptom of an ongoing systemic failure to govern.
Okay, so let's unpack this. I think we should start with the people who felt the crunch first, state and local governments.
Yes.
Our sources are just crystal clear on this. Local governments are the backbone of our nation's services and infrastructure, and when Washington stalls, they get put in a budget vice immediately.
They absolutely are. When the federal taps shut down, state and local budgets, which, remember, are legally required to be balanced, they can't just pause.
Yeah.
The National League of Cities, the NLC, they highlighted so many immediate municipal challenges. Think about delayed disaster reimbursements from FEMA, a city that spent millions responding to a flood back in October expecting federal money.
Now that cash flow is just frozen.
And that could cripple their immediate operating budget.
And it's not just disaster relief, right? The sources cited halted housing assistance and just the severe uncertainty for families who depend on nutrition benefits.
That's right. But the temporary budget did score some crucial wins, even if they were short-lived.
So what essential programs did that CR and minibus actually secure funding for?
Okay, so several key programs saw a temporary salvation. For instance, the state and local cybersecurity grant program, that's the SLCGP, was reauthorized. But here's the catch note, the duration.
Only through January 2026.
Only through January. Other essentials, like the FEMA Disaster Relief Fund and general grant programs, were maintained at their prior year. That's FY 2025 levels. And the National Flood Insurance Program, the NFIP, that authorization was also extended, which prevents a very specific kind of financial chaos.
Right, for homeowners and real estate. But where it gets really interesting for public benefits is the duration of the fix. I'm thinking of SNAP-P.
SNAP-P benefits were fully restored, and that funding is secured all the way through September 2026. That's a major win.
It is, because that provides stability not just for millions of families, but also for the agricultural and supply chain businesses that, they rely on the predictability of that demand.
Exactly. And crucially, LIHEAP funding, that's the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, that was released just in time for the worst of the winter heating costs.
And Small Business Administration loans, the SBA loans, are finally being expedited again.
Yes, supporting local economies that took a really hard hit during that 43-day pause.
So we got a temporary sigh of relief, but the NLC's view, if we look closely at the sources, is highly skeptical.
Well, they say this short-term resolution is not enough, and they're demanding a comprehensive funding package that stabilizes that federal-local partnership.
And that's the critical takeaway here, isn't it? The underlying pressure hasn't gone away.
Not at all. I mean, if you are running a city, you can't plan infrastructure projects or long-term housing if you know you might hit another federal funding cliff 60 days from now. That uncertainty forces local governments to operate inefficiently, diverting resources to contingency planning instead of actually delivering services.
And that brings us to the core tension. Why is it so difficult to get that comprehensive package? Let's transition to the legislative war over spending authority. This is what makes the January 30th deadline so fundamentally dangerous. It's not just about the dollar amount.
No. It's about who actually controls the dollars.
Exactly.
Precisely. What we're seeing is a deep-seated reaction from congressional Democrats to counter the administration's pattern of shifting, freezing, or attempting to cancel billions of dollars that Congress had already explicitly approved.
So they're trying to write these bills to have more teeth.
They're motivated to write appropriations bills that include explicit constraints on executive power. And that power struggle is central. Our sources quoted Senator Patty Murray, who said the current funding bills, even if flawed, are, and I'm quoting here, immeasurably better than the President and White House Budget Director, Russ Vought, holding the pen.
Can you elaborate on that? The mechanism of this power struggle. What exactly does the administration do to shift funds?
It all centers on budget execution.
Mm-hmm.
So Congress approves funding for a specific purpose, let's say X amount for non-detention immigration efforts. But the administration can use executive transfer authority or reprogramming requests to, well, effectively redirect that money to a different priority.
Often without full legislative approval.
Right. And this practice fundamentally strips Congress of its constitutional power of the purse.
So Congress is trying to use the appropriations bills themselves as a kind of legal leash. And that struggle is stalling two of the most critical measures right now.
That's right. First, the energy bill. And this is mired in an intra-party disagreement. This is Republicans fighting Republicans.
Interesting.
Senate Appropriations Chair Susan Collins is at odds with Senator John Kennedy, who is taking a hard line on specific provisions. So a necessary funding bill is just stuck in limbo.
And then there's the DHS measure. That one hasn't even been unveiled yet.
No, because the dispute over curbing the administration's immigration agenda is just that profound. The sources highlight Senator Chris Murphy's demands for real constraints to prevent those alleged illegal transfers of funding.
And he cited a specific case, didn't he?
He did. $600 million that Congress approved for specific functions, which the administration has apparently redirected for detaining immigrants. So Murphy is pushing for explicit, non-transferable budget language to lock those funds down.
The lesson for you here is pretty clear. The January clish isn't just a scheduling issue. It is a high-stakes proxy war. And the outcome is going to determine whether Congress or the executive branch holds the fundamental authority over federal finances for the next fiscal year.
The instability is baked right into the process itself.
Shifting gears a bit, let's look at the operational reality for the agencies and the businesses that are now trying to ramp up after 43 days of paralysis. This is where the political fight translates directly into a time-critical risk for the private sector.
Absolutely. And the clock is ticking fastest for government contractors. They incurred massive costs during the shutdown, winding down operations, demobilizing, maintaining an idle workforce.
And now paying overtime to remobilize.
Exactly. They can seek reimbursement, but the deadlines are immediate and they are unforgiving.
Okay, here's where it gets technical for you if you work with federal contracts. The standard Federal Acquisition Regulation, or FAR, clauses, specifically the changes clauses or the suspension of work clause, they require contractors to assert their right to an adjustment within an extremely tight window. We're talking 20 or 30 days of the triggering event.
And the triggering event, the start of the shutdown, was way back on October 1st. This is a massive administrative headache with real financial consequences. A contractor who paid to keep, say, critical IT staff on retainer in November.
Just waiting for the all clear.
Waiting. They have to file their claim for those costs now. If they miss that 20 or 30-day window, they could be absorbing millions in costs that they otherwise would have been reimbursed for. The government is open, sure, but the deadlines are already upon them.
That tight turnaround is mirrored in really complex international and regulatory processes. In trade and national security, the pause created some serious bottlenecks.
Oh, huge ones. Take the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS.
Right. They review foreign investments for national security risks.
And during the shutdown, they didn't just pause their deadlines, they told them.
And that's a key technical distinction.
It is. Told means the clock completely stopped. Now that the government is reopened, that clock has immediately resumed, meaning CFIUS faces a massive backlog. Any private equity or corporate transaction that requires CFIUS approval is now going to experience significant delays.
Potentially disrupting major deal timelines. And it's not just CFIUS.
Not at all. The entire trade regulatory complex was essentially frozen. The Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security, that's BIS, the State Department's DDTC, Treasury's OFAC, these are the agencies that handle critical export controls and sanctions licenses.
And they all suspended processing?
Most of it, yes. So companies that need licenses to export sensitive technology or conduct sanctioned trade, They now have to build months of additional time into their scheduling. It's a cumulative bottleneck affecting everything from high-tech manufacturing to global finance.
We should note one interesting operational exception here, the EPA.
Yes. While most agencies were paralyzed, the EPA kept many essential functions running. And what's fascinating is how they did it.
Right, they weren't just relying on their annual appropriations.
No. The EPA was able to use what's called public law carryover funds. These are dedicated funds that were specifically appropriated through recent major legislation, think infrastructure or climate bills, outside of the annual appropriations process.
So they had money set aside for specific projects that wasn't tied to this CR fight.
Exactly. And this allowed them to continue advancing chemical reviews, working on that new Waters of the U.S. definition, with about 40% of their staff. They avoided the complete collapse we saw elsewhere, like at the Department of Justice, where many grant-making offices were shuttered.
Creating huge backlogs in civil litigation and grant distribution.
Huge backlogs.
As we approach this January 30th deadline, we need to talk about specific policy cliffs that were deliberately not resolved by this temporary funding package. Let's start with a big one for millions of Americans: healthcare.
The Affordable Care Act enhanced premium tax credits. They were a central focus of Democrats during the shutdown negotiation, yet the CR pointedly did not extend them.
And this is a critical policy cliff. Those tax credits expire on December 31st, 2025.
Weeks before the funding resolution even ends.
Which means potential chaos for millions planning their health coverage. The Senate has pledged a vote in mid-December, but the White House is signaling resistance, floating an alternative focused on health savings accounts, HSAs.
It's a classic political stalemate where the clock is just running out on consumer subsidies. Interestingly, some Medicare flexibilities were saved, but only temporarily.
Like telehealth.
Telehealth services and the Hospital at Home initiative were extended retroactively, but only through the January 30th deadline. So a temporary fix for providers, but a major looming uncertainty for consumers who rely on those ACA subsidies.
We also need to examine the labor landscape, specifically the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB. During the shutdown, union elections and unfair labor practice investigations, they all stopped. That created a substantial backlog. But the backlog is compounded by an even deeper problem: governance.
This is a systemic issue. The NLRB has been operating without the required 3-member quorum for most of this year. And the confirmation status of new board members, which would restore that quorum, is uncertain. It's all tied up in those broader political fights we were just talking about.
So what's the actual consequence of not having a quorum?
Well, without a quorum, the board cannot make final binding decisions on complex cases. Staff can conduct investigations, they can hold preliminary hearings, but those final legal rulings, the things that actually determine enforcement, they can't be issued.
Which means the shutdown delays are being layered on top of months of previous inaction.
Pushing resolution on major labor cases well into 2026. This vacuum is so pronounced that some states are trying to enact their own labor enforcement laws to fill the void, though federal preemption will likely challenge them.
And finally, the greatest operational challenge facing the public right now: the IRS staffing crisis and backlog.
It's a perfect storm. The IRS was able to use its multi-year funding to stay partially open for the first few days of the shutdown, but then they had to furlough about half their workforce.
And now they're trying to resume operations with a headcount that is 25% smaller than it was at the start of the year.
It's a massive reduction, down from over 100,000 employees to under 76,000. A 25% reduction in force, combined with a huge backlog of paper returns and correspondence. It's a monumental challenge for the 2026 filing season.
Absolutely. They have a compressed schedule just to perform basic functions, like updating forms and publications for the new year.
And that's before you even get to the really challenging stuff, which is the regulatory implementation of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the OBBA.
The nickname for that major spending bill that delivered significant tax changes.
Right. And this includes critical guidance that businesses need on things like green energy credits and bonus depreciation. Without that guidance, businesses can't adequately plan their 2025 filings. The IRS has to race to get that work done while trying to catch up on everything else. It's an impossible timeline.
So what does this all mean? The immediate relief that the longest government shutdown is over, that's real. Paychecks are flowing. SNAP-E and LIHEAP have short-term funding.
But that relief just masks an immense operational complexity and severe political gridlock that is now entirely focused on that January 30, 2026 deadline.
We've established that contractors face an immediate race against regulatory deadlines to claim reimbursement. State and local governments have to continue to adapt to volatile federal actions.
And key regulatory bodies, particularly the IRS and the NLRB, they face such severe staffing and governance problems that they're going to slow down critical processes and taxpayer services well into 2026, no matter what happens with the budget. The problems didn't end with the CR.
They just converged on one date.
Exactly.
And that's the tension we want to leave you with today. Our sources highlighted a very specific reaction to this recurring federal chaos, the anticipation of over 1,000 pieces of proposed state laws, rules, and guidance expected by the start of legislative sessions in January 2026.
And these are explicitly intended to fill the regulatory voids caused by federal uncertainty in areas like environmental rules and consumer protection.
So the question for you to consider is this: how much authority are states gaining by necessity, because the federal government can't stay open, or by deliberate design when that federal partnership falters? And how will that resulting patchwork of local rules affect your business or your daily life?
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.